You know, I read that book, he read that book, he ain't do nothing but quote a bunch of other people to tell me what I can't do. Shut up. I'm out here doing it.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
I read The Wretched Narc. I read Franz Fanon. I read all these books, but I also read Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? I've also read some Thomas Sowell. I also read some Walt T. Williams. So I read enough to take a look from here, to take a look from there, and to form my own. If you only read and are instructed by you read, you're just a clone. You know, I read that nigga book, he read that book, he ain't do nothing but quote a bunch of other people to tell me what I can't do. Shut up. I'm out here doing it. You professor, what they say? They say those who can do. Those who
can do, those that can't teach.
And those who can't and don't know how to teach teachers.
Somewhere there's a better joke in here about such a wildly ignorant conversation, ostensibly about race, class, economics, political economy, taking place while also denigrating the very idea of intellectualism, education, and professorial efforts. Somewhere in there, there's something funny about that, given just how bad that conversation was in its entirety. The link's in the show description if you want to watch the whole thing. I think what I just clipped there is a perfect summary of how bad the politics are. And then, of course, when I get called out, without, of course, my name being mentioned or book being specifically referenced, and in that particular way, with the broader assault on intellectualism and study, and particularly radical politics, why not have some sort of small response to that? So, first off, if you haven't already, you can get the book in question here. And if anyone doubts that he was in fact talking about me or my work, you can please check the links in the show description for previous evidence of that. You can also refer to the book itself for my really just passing discussion of Killer Mike, making reference to him only to point out how Black capitalist and Black buying power mythology is often distilled through pop culture, popular celebrity, and in this case, Killer Mike, Jay-Z, a few others, all to make the point that this is how these mythologies circulate, unlike the Black dollar, but in fact circulate for real within Black political conversation in the public sphere, encouraging Black people away from radical politics and into entrepreneurial Black capitalist efforts, which have been demonstrated for a very long time to be wildly insufficient in addressing the actual material problems of the Black working class and Black community collectively, and anyone else for that matter, other than the tiny Black bourgeoisie that emerges that Mike so eloquently represents in this and other interviews. But instead of engaging my work and ideas, giving them honest inclusion and discussion, or engaging me honestly, he has, as I've explained over the last few years, taken this approach repeatedly, which more than assaults or insults me, is really doing a disservice to the people he claims he wants to represent and lead to better conditions and a better world. So if anything, people who would sit and enjoy Killer Mike's presentations should think, why is he so resistant and unwilling to actually engage the work he constantly keeps condemning? Why doesn't he just pull it up and demonstrate how what I've said is insufficient or wrong? Instead, it's important to note that even in that clip there, Mike said he read Fanon, but only wants to reference the neo-colonial bourgeoisie that Frantz Fanon was so critical of. Mike is not reading what he claims to, or he is admitting his political position in favor of colonization, capitalism, and the continued exploitation of the community he claims he represents, the majority of Black working people. There's a key difference between reading, agreeing with, and adhering to. So Mike says he read Fanon. He, in fact, claims to have read my book as well. But he adheres to, he agrees with Walter E. Williams, Thomas Sowell, and the very colonized intellectuals Frantz Fanon warned us against. You don't have to take my word for it. A quick Wikipedia search will show you Sowell, Walter E. Williams. These are right-wing, white supremacist, think tank, Black intellectual spokespeople. They come out of the von Mises Institute, which I've talked about elsewhere in terms of who von Mises was and his being used to promote the free market as a corporate strategy of, quote, reconquering America after the Second World War to bring the United States back into free market fundamentalism mythology. And then here Sowell, or rather Walter E. Williams, goes to that institute. They both work with the Pacific Research Institute for Public Policy, or PRI, which is said here is a California-based free market think tank, which promotes, quote, the principles of individual freedom and personal responsibility through policies that emphasize a free market economy, private initiative, and limited government. And of course, they both have worked with the Manhattan Institute. So again, like Glenn Loury, John McWhorter, these are the black intellectuals picked to be the neo-colonial bourgeois colonized academic scholars that produce this kind of free market fundamental mythology that Killer Mike adheres to. Because if folks remember the history of this exchange, what started this was him holding up a copy of Walter E. Williams' book and a copy of my book and saying he's reading everything. And I'm saying, you, as long as you understand that we are in opposition to one another, we can't both be right. But while in the interview, Killer Mike wants to name drop people like Fanon and Dr. King and other black radicals, he sides with those who work against Dr. King, like Andy Young, and against the guerrilla intellectualism and anti-colonial intellectualism that Fanon advocated, hence Killer Mike's support for Thomas Sowell and Walter E. Williams. The reality is he's politically opposed and ideologically opposed to the work that I do and that I'm involved in. But instead of confronting that directly, it becomes, again, this indirect, unnamed straw argument against an enemy that isn't there, that isn't standing in front of him, that isn't saying anything, and that he's misrepresenting. And then to diminish, again, more broadly, the intellectual project of the professoriate, while acknowledging that he will read the other. So they all, apparently, Walter E. Williams and Sowell, they are doing the real work. I'm just quoting people. I mean, it's absurd, but he could demonstrate that. If there's some flaw in my methodology, he could walk through the book, as could anyone else, and demonstrate the flaws in my methodology and therefore the flaws in my conclusion. But of course, he's not going to do that. Similarly, he's not going to walk people through the arguments of Williams and Sowell to demonstrate the value of their methodology, because that would further expose the limits of their politics and their analysis, the incorrectness of their politics and analysis, and show Killer Mike not to be an actual representative of the people, but a representative of the bourgeoisie, black and white. All right, but just a quick response to that silly attempt to disparage me and my work and the broader intellectual, academic, and activist endeavors of those of us on Killer Mike's left politically. And I'm headed back to my 5 courses this semester at an HBCU teaching black students to think more critically about their environment so that they are less susceptible to the unfortunate analyses and arguments that we see on Club Shay Shay and delivered through Killer Mike. I bid you peace, as Fred Hampton used to, only if you're willing to fight for it.
Looks like a home run to me.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.